Okay, good evening everybody. This is our second session of our class on how to make, we can amend it to how to make your relationships perfect instead of your marriage, because it really applies to any kind of relationship, not just a marriage. And we have a different group of people tonight, but I'm sure that a lot of the principles that we spoke about in the first class will rehash and revisit in one form or another in this discussion. So those of you who were here will build further on what we learned, and those of you who might not have been here will still touch on a lot of the same ideas. So tonight's topic, what I'd like to speak about tonight, is a very favorite subject. Last week we talked more about how to listen. How to understand. What is my partner, my significant other really trying to express? What do they really want? How to give them the sense that they're being understood and that they are not being shut out. How to go towards the emotion instead of away from it, and so on. So we spoke about those principles, which are very, very important, especially towards the emotion. That's the most important thing that you have to remember from all that. But tonight what I'd like to talk about is disagreements. Okay? There's a common belief that married couples have to fight. They must fight. So I would amend that by saying couples must disagree. There's no way you're going to agree on everything, but you don't necessarily have to fight. So how do we define the difference between a disagreement and a fight? I would suggest, as a working operational definition, the difference between fighting and disagreeing is you disagree about something. In other words, you can disagree about what the best restaurant is to go for dinner. You can disagree about what the best financial planning is. You can disagree about what the right way to discipline children is, and so on and so forth. There can be lots of disagreements about subjects. And disagreements happen in all arenas of life. There are disagreements in politics. There are disagreements in your place of employment. Disagreement is ubiquitous. But fighting is different, because fighting is not about coming to a common understanding or sharing views about a subject, where everybody has many, many nuances in how they see things, and of course there are going to be disagreements. But fighting is about who's going to win. Okay, fighting is about winning. Disagreeing is not necessarily about winning. Now, your goal in the disagreement might be either that you want to share your perspective, or that you need to have one, you can only make one choice, and you need to come to some kind of a compromise, or you need to come to some kind of a decision, practical decision. So therefore there's a disagreement about what to do. You share perspectives, you make arguments back and forth. By arguments, I don't mean screaming arguments, but I mean you state your case, and you attempt to come up with some consensus, let's say, or some common understanding or action. That's what a disagreement is. Disagreement is inevitable. There's no way that you're always going to want to go to the same restaurant, or you spend time in the same way, or you're going to think the same way, or you're going to agree on issues 100% of the time. Very, very unlikely. Pretty much impossible. However, fighting is a different thing. Fighting is about who's going to win. That's what a fight is. If we were to distinguish between the two, which means it's my ego against your ego. And the reason why I'm investing so much in the fight is not because I want to bring some clarity to an issue, or I want us to reach a consensus on an issue. It's because my ego is bruised and I want to now assert it over yours. That's what fighting is about. It's about winning. So we have to keep this in mind, because oftentimes disagreements evolve or devolve into fights. Because what begins as a disagreement transitions into, well, you only think that because you're an idiot. Right? And, well, that's because you are bleeding heart liberal. Well, that's because you're a heartless conservative, if you're talking about politics. And that explains why you're not nice to my mother, and I hate your mother, and I hate your family. And then everything, it becomes about who's better than the other. It doesn't become about the issue anymore. And nobody wants to lose a fight, because losing a fight means I'm worse than you. Because it becomes about who's better. And nobody wants to come out in second place when there are only two places to be in, first or second. Winner or loser. Who's going to be better? Who's going to scream the loudest? Who's going to win? That's a fight. Now, fights can be avoided if we learn how to disagree. And of course, there are professionals at disagreement management and mediators who are able to help people who are on the brink of fighting or already in the midst of fighting transition their fight to a disagreement, or make sure that what could potentially be a fight remains as a disagreement. That's how I would define really what mediation is about. If you have a third party who's mediating a discussion, their job is to prevent it from becoming personal, from preventing it from becoming a fight. And in order to, and again, I made little notes here so I don't forget any important points because my printer doesn't work. So I made it on index cards like the old style, I feel like I'm a professor from the 80s now. So let's go through some of the principles like we did last time that can help guide us in managing our disagreements most effectively. And of course, the goal always is maintaining harmony to the greatest extent possible, and we have to keep that as our overarching objective. So the first thing that one has to consider when we're getting into the territory of disagreement is choose your battles. Now that's something that you'll hear all the time. It's even a cliche, but it's very true. Choose your battles. Is it really worth arguing over this point? Is it really going to accomplish anything? Whether we go out to have pizza tonight or we go out for Chinese, is it really going to make or break my week, my day, my life, my next month, my next year? Or can I let it go? If there's something that my spouse feels strongly about and articulates a position, and I really want to get into the thick of things and, go up, is now the right time? Is it really worth it? Or we have a disagreement about what to do in some area of our lives, and my spouse feels very strongly about it. Is it really worth going to the mat to argue this one out and to try to express my position? So question number one is it worth it? Because the truth is that many arguments or many disagreements, and certainly many fights, don't need to be had at all, because they're not really about anything important. And that's why we have a principle of ma'avir al midotav, a person who lets go of what's really due to them. Yes, you have a right to express your opinion. People love rights, and especially in our society. And everyone's got a right to express their opinion. We know that. But it's not always the best use of your time to express your opinion. As sometimes it's a complete waste of time. We all know that we've been in situations, probably more often than not, probably 99% of the time, when we're very tempted to express our opinion to another opinionated person who has just said something that really makes our blood boil, and we want to share our perspective on it and give them and clarify matters, and we realize we're not really going to get anywhere. From the beginning we realize it. And you know what? It's better to be friends with this person and not to get into this issue, because this issue is going to end up being a volatile issue. So number one is don't play with matches. You might start a fire. Why get involved in something potentially dangerous that can spin out of control when it's really not that important? It's really not worth taking up the issue. So question number one is always, is this issue worth getting into a disagreement? Because even the best disagreement is still a disagreement. There's still distance created between you and the other person. There's still the potential that other things will come up along the way that will be damaging to your relationship, or that will create friction, or that will create resentment, and so on and so forth. So you always want to budget your disagreements. We're not talking about some abstract intellectual disagreement that's unlikely to, like which novelist is better, or which movie was better, or something like that. That's not the type of thing that's going to usually get you into any trouble. But things that are closer to home, even if they're conducted in a very civil way, can open up a Pandora's box of problems. So if you don't need to disagree, if you can let it go, let the issue go if possible. That's principle number one. So always be careful what you expend your energy on, because remember, you have a limited amount of energy. Both of you have a limited amount of patience. So you want to make sure you budget that, because everyone can be we all know that there's the straw that breaks the camel's back. Right? You're having a bad day, things are not going that well, and somebody adds just one more slight strain to what's already an overstretched, overstrained heart or mind, and they can't take it anymore, even though it's about nothing. So, step number one is choose your battles. Yes?
I feel like you're putting a big premium on agreement in marriage, but I don't have any experience, but I feel like a marriage where you agree on everything, there would be nothing to talk about.
No. Well, no, it depends what you're talking about. I mean, is it really worth disagreeing about? It might be worth disagreeing about, really important philosophical things that you're discussing or something like that. We're not talking about that. I mean, you could sit down and discuss a book together, you could discuss a movie together, you could discuss Torah together, you could discuss philosophies together, you could discuss anything together and have differences of opinion, but these are not even touching on personal issues, so they're unlikely to be volatile. But most disagreements that end up being really having an effect on Shalom Bayit are the things that are a little bit closer to home. Like, what should we do for the holiday that's coming up? Should we go to your parents or my parents? Oh no, please, let's not go into that territory, because we know that even if you make the best argument for why should we go to we should go to your parents, I'm going to take it personally, right? So there's all kinds of fine nuances in those kinds of things. Yeah.
An example, like, you're going to have to make a decision about which parents to go to, right?
Right.
So if you're going to have a discussion about that.
Of course.
To make a decision.
Right. Yeah. So that's an example of something that you're not going to be able to avoid. And then you go to how to handle it best. But the issue that, we're not talking about philosophical issues, but the personal issues, there are some that are unavoidable, and then there's some that are avoidable, right? Like, for example, your spouse said something that bothered you before. It wasn't intentional. You know it wasn't intentional, but it hurt your feelings. Now, you could open up that discussion and say, listen, that really bothered me before, let's talk about it and all that. Or you could say, I realized it was just an accident, I'm not going to bring it up, because why bring it up and get into a whole thing, and then she's going to get defensive, or he's going to get defensive, and then we're going to have an argument. I might as well just let it go. So there are situations where it's worth letting it go, and there are situations where, this keeps happening again and again, and I really have to address it. I have to address it because it keeps happening, and it's a problem, and I need it to change. So these are the kinds of things that where you might feel that you have no choice, you must get into a disagreement. So then you have to define, what is your goal? What's the goal? So let's say, for instance, your spouse thinks that it's okay to call you names. Like we talked about last week, that's a bad idea. But let's say that they didn't come to the class, so they didn't know. So, or whatever, they're doing something on a consistent basis. They have a habit that is really getting on your nerves, really bothering you. So the question is, what is your goal with bringing it up? You want to change their behavior, let's say. That's one possible goal. Another possible goal is you just want to express to them that something, they might not realize that something that they're doing is bothering you. Okay? So you know that by bringing it up, you're opening up the possibility that they're going to get very upset, they're going to be insulted, they're going to take it personally and all these other things, but it's really bothering you. Now, if you were Moshe Rabbeinu, maybe you wouldn't care. But nobody around this table is Moshe Rabbeinu, so we're dealing with normal human interactions. So something really is starting to get to you, and you feel that you need to get it off your chest. Or you have, like we said before, some practical issue that needs to be decided. Listen, we have to decide where we're going on vacation. Are we going on vacation to Alaska, or are we going to Cancun? Very different destinations. Where are we going to go? Yeah, I know where you want to go. We're having rice for dinner? Or something else. I know what the answer is. I wasn't going to ask those kinds of questions. In your case, you don't have a choice. That's not even a choice. I'm talking about people have a choice. So when there is choice to be had and a decision needs to be made, so we need to come to a practical decision, and we know that we have different views about this. So let's sit down and work them out. So that's a case where, again, you need to come to a common understanding. So it's not just about asking your spouse, let's say, to stop doing something that's really getting on your nerves. Okay, and it's not just about dealing with expressing your feelings about something that's hurt your feelings, and it's about actually coming to a common understanding. In other words, what are we going to do? How are we going to handle this? You have a child, you're raising a child, and you have to decide what's the right way to discipline the child. We have to have a consistent approach. What are we going to do? The mother can't just decide, the father can't just decide. There has to be a common understanding, and we might have differences of opinion, and we need to work them out. So these are cases where you need to come to an agreement, actually, in the end, of some kind. So keeping the goal in mind is important, because there are many things that you can do to throw the game. In other words, where you won't be able to reach your final goal. It will backfire. It will go on tangents. It will become World War III, or maybe even World War IV if you're very bad, which we wouldn't want, because even skip an entire World War, it's so terrible. So let's try to get to some of the things we can do in the course of a disagreement that will help us manage it better. And if you've ever mediated a disagreement, which I have done many, 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 many times, especially with married couples, you learn a lot of these tricks, and they work well also if you're trying to help others. So it's a good skill to know, not only for your own disagreements, but also for when you are trying to help other people work out their differences, and you're the third party. Okay? One of them is, you need to have, and I know this is hard, you need to have what Dale Carnegie actually talks in How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is a book I read many, many, many years ago. Like, I was probably a teenager when I read it, but I remember one of the things that he said is you need to have a genuine interest in other people. If it's not genuine, it doesn't count. And the same thing is true here, that you need to have a genuine respect for the other person. If you come in thinking, I'm just going to railroad this I'm just going to steamroll this person, and we're going to do it, it's going to be my way, and whatever they say, I'm just going to argue against them and pummel them with my will until I win, so then that's not the way to go about it, because number one, even if you do win, you've just planted seeds of resentment that are going to come back to get you, and you've destroyed your shalom bayit. So even if you get your way, you might win the battle, but you lose the war, as they say, and you don't want that. So having genuine respect for one another means, first of all, listening to the other side too, when there's a disagreement. Really listening, not just saying, yeah, yes honey, yes dear, No, but actually understanding what they're saying. Because guess what? Not only is it more effective when you listen, you might actually learn something. You might even, chas v'chalila, change your opinion if you actually listen to what your spouse thinks. Did you know that? Sometimes they can be right, the other person. It's very rare. I mean, it's never happened to me. In my experience, it's very rare. But it's possible. At least in theory, that your spouse may be right or actually have something to contribute that might change your perspective, but you're so busy thinking, what's my response going to be to this, so I end up getting my way in the end, that you're not even really listening to what the other person says, and therefore they are talking to a wall. Like the story about the guy who brought his bride to the kotel before their wedding so she would learn how to talk to a wall, right? That was the old joke. So that's not what you want. You want to actually listen, because through actually listening, you will possibly learn something, first of all. But you have to have the respect for the other to believe that. And if you're married to somebody, or they're your significant other, you should, as a baseline, believe that they have something to contribute to your life and actually know something. And that you might not always be right. Even I thought I made a mistake once. I was wrong, though. Did you know that? That was my English teacher from high school, who used to say that every day. So, here's another trick. I call it a trick because it's somewhat of a trick. It's a strategy. And it's a strategy in all disagreements and all debates that you'll ever have. Not just with your spouse, but in every other setting as well. And it's something that that I haven't seen in any book, but it's something that I've derived from experience. And that is, agree with the other person as much as humanly possible. Okay? If there's an issue of disagreement that you feel needs to be resolved, agree with 99% of the things that they say. Only disagree with the one item that's actually germane. Okay? Why is that important? It's important for two reasons. Reason number one is, the more you can agree with another person, okay, the more that they feel that you actually respect them, and the less likely it is that it's going to become you against them, that it's going to be something personal. Yes, you're absolutely right. People love to hear those words. Those are one of the phrases that almost everyone loves to hear. Yes, you're right. You're absolutely right. I agree with you. You're smart. You're great. You're a genius. All those things are things that people like to hear. So lay it on thick. Agree with everything that you can agree with in the debate. And then when you get to the one point, you've already sweetened it so much along the way that it's a lot easier now for you to disagree about the one point that you disagree on. So the reason number one that you should agree as much as possible is because it keeps your relationship with the other person as close as possible and has as little distance as possible created between you. But the other reason why it's really valuable to agree as much as possible is because when the worst thing that people do in disagreements, and anyone who's ever observed any debate of any kind, whether it's a theological debate, a religious debate, or a political debate, or a personal debate, is that tangents are rampant all the time. Because what happens is, you get into a discussion of, we really have a problem here that we're not getting along for X reason. And then as you're talking, some other incident is brought up, and oh yeah, and in that case you were also so bad that you did this, and it's like all of a sudden you're talking about another issue. And then you start fighting about that issue. And then that issue, of course, recalls a third issue, and you start fighting about that, and then it gets into a fourth issue, and you start fighting about that. So minimizing that and saying, you're right about that situation, that was a terrible situation, let's just focus on this one, is the best thing you can do. Because if you try to engage them on the other issue too, then it's like trying to fight 4 different armies with only one army. Because you're opening up all of these different battlefronts, and you don't have the ammunition or the manpower to be able to handle it. It just gets out of control. It spins out of control, and usually that's the most volatile fights. So what I find is, and this is true even in religious debates and theological debates, if you're debating somebody about some religious thing, agree with them as much as possible. That's what I do whenever I'm disagreeing with somebody, let's say, who's secular, a secular person. I've had many discussions with secular people. I had one time, I've told you about the story, maybe I haven't told you recently, it was years ago, that I had a discussion with a physicist, actually, and he was an atheist or whatever he was, very anti-religious, and I just kept responding to him, and I agreed with almost everything he said. I agreed with everything he said, except that I think that there's a God. Yeah, you're absolutely right. Most religious people are wrong about many things, and some of them are wrong about this and that. You're absolutely right, and this is wrong. And of course, that's a foolish idea too. But the one thing we kept going back to, and what happened? We actually became friends through that. Now, he didn't know me before. We met online through another forum. But the point is that by agreeing with him on so many things, if I tried to pick on every point of disagreement, nuanced disagreement that we had, we would have lost the forest for the trees. We would have ended up having all these little skirmishes about little issues and never gotten down to the heart of the matter. And that's why whenever I'm dealing with somebody whenever I see a couple who's fighting, what I try to do is, first of all, say, you know what? You're right about everything that you said, and you're right about everything that you said, except for this one issue. Let's just focus on this one issue. And if we can narrow it down to this one issue, we have a chance. But if we're going to try to deal with all 100 issues between you, and you want to fight them out all now, forget it. It's overwhelming. Because that issue is unresolved, and then that's going to bring up resentment on the other issue, and then another issue, and then another issue. And it's not only about where are we going for the holiday, but it's about that you didn't take out the garbage last week, and you also crashed my car into a tree, and then also you... yes?
This physicist that you had these discussions
Mm-hmm.
with, could he end up changing his mind?
To the point that he respected that a religious person could actually be a thinking person. And he was actually interested in further discussions. I mean, I don't think that he became, a devout religious person, but that wasn't my goal. My only goal, so again, that's the point. Like, my goal was just to show him that you could be a believer, a religious person, and a person who believes in God, but be totally rational and accept science and be able to engage in all the other areas, and just we disagree about this one point, but we have something to share. And at the end, he said an unbelievable thing. I could show you one day some of the emails taking out the identifying information because he's kind of famous. But we at the end of it, after many very patient exchanges, he said to me, "You succeeded in doing something that he's Jewish, that nobody's ever succeeded in doing, which is to get me to actually have an intelligent conversation about religion." And he's like, "I see that we're really doing the same thing. We're trying to help people bring reason and intelligence into their lives in different ways." And it was like out of nowhere. It was like but it was just because I kept not allowing the peripheral possible arguments we could have to distract us. And this is true in relationships. It happens all the time. Who hasn't seen that? That one argument about one local thing ignites an old dispute about something else, which ignites another one, and you keep trying to argue every point. Well, you were wrong in that situation. Yeah, well, what about this situation? Well, you were wrong there too, and then we'll fight that out. And then we forgot how we originally got here. And then it becomes a 7-hour, all-night-long bickering. It happens all the time, unfortunately. So what's the solution? The solution is, whatever you can agree on, like the Rambam says a very nice thing in the beginning of the Guide to the Perplexed, which has nothing to do with relationships or marriage, but it has to do with metaphysics and philosophy. But what he says is that an author who's writing about one subject will sometimes... don't expect that every time I bring up a certain subject, I'm going to give you the most accurate, most thorough, most precise definition of every tangential issue that comes up. because that's not the topic of discussion. When I'm discussing that, I'll give you the precise definition. When we're talking about something else, I might just give you kind of a blanket mention of the other thing without going into the nuance and without defining it and without being exact. He says, so don't hold me to what I said in chapter 10 about something that really is discussed in chapter 25. And so the same thing is true here. If you're having a discussion about chapter 10, don't get it to chapter 25 and try to exhaust it. Just say, you know what, you're right, that wasn't a problematic issue, I don't want to discuss that, I just want to stay on this. And just let it go. Because if you can let it go and settle on that issue, because you're going to come back to it another time, or maybe not, then you have a better chance of resolving the issue at hand. Yes?
But if you say, but yeah, you're right about that, when you really don't mean that, that could be used against you later. Don't you want to sort of say, like, let's get into that some other time?
You could say it, you could word it however you want. I find that I find that if you can agree, you don't have to agree with what their position was, but just say, you're right, that was a really problematic situation. But I just don't, let's stay focused on this. You're not necessarily saying you're right there and I was wrong, but you're just saying that was really problematic. But don't get dragged into those tangential things. So the point is, try to minimize, in other words, the amount of disagreement. Could be a way to summarize this rule. So you can minimize the amount of disagreement, number one, by agreeing on as many points as you can find to agree on. If the person says, well, you did this and this and this, you're right, I did that and that and that, and all those things were mistakes, but this one thing that we're talking about now is really the only issue. If you can do that, there's nothing that a person likes more than I wish I had a nickel or maybe $1, because a nickel doesn't go too far nowadays, for every time that the way that I got somebody back to the negotiating table of a couple that was in dispute was by telling one of them, I agree with everything you're saying, you're absolutely right, let's just talk about this one subject. Because once I hear you're absolutely right, oh, I'm absolutely right about everything except this one thing, now I can listen to you. Now I'm back on. And it's true, it works. I can tell you from experience. So minimize no matter what the area is, with your employer too, in work. If there's one issue that you have, don't bring every issue. Don't roll out every problem that you have right now. It doesn't have to be just the one issue. If they say, "Well, you didn't do this," you're right about all those things. You're absolutely right. Those things have to be handled. But right now, I need this. My classroom has only 5 chairs and I have 17 kids. Could we bring them? Right? So that's the one issue that I have. And that will help you to minimize dispute. Because you bring only the issues that need to be brought up right now. There's only so much we can handle at once. And it keeps you together. So, that's... Now let's get to what happens. So far we had respecting one another, agreeing as much as possible, in order to keep yourselves together as you're having a discussion. Not focusing on winning, because winning is not the name of the game, but coming to a common understanding where you can both walk away with some either agreeing to disagree, with some, which sometimes is acceptable. When it's a matter of principle, you can agree to disagree. When it's a matter of action, you may have to find a compromise. But you're more likely to find a compromise if you're actually listening to the other person. And when you actually listen to them, they're going to be more inclined to actually listen to you. And you might just generate a compromise that you never expected to find. We call that synergy. Okay? Whereas when you're staunch in your position and the other one is staunch, there's no conversation really happening, and you get distracted by a million tangents, and you never really allow a discussion to occur about a subject. It becomes about who's going to win. Who's better, me or you? Well, I could tell you 500 things you did wrong, and only 499 that I did wrong, so ha. Like, yeah, but what does that give you? Right? That and $2 will get you a coffee.
This week's parasha, you pointed out last week, but it's this week's parasha with
Yaakov and Lavan is a good example of that, or of something else. But yeah. Many things, of a lot of things. But, really, Esav and Yaakov is an even better example of this. Because what does Yaakov do? And he doesn't try to bring up, actually you sold me. I mean, what's wrong with you, man? You actually sold me the firstborn, and then, you made such a big deal out of it. I've been on the run for 20 years. I mean, he doesn't do that. He bows to him. He says, you're great. You're like seeing the face of God. You're so wonderful.
He just learned that.
And the whole principle was, when he wrestles with the angel, is that he learns you have to really see the face of God in Esav to be able to have a relationship with him. That's what that is. In other words, the problem of Yaakov is he doesn't really respect his opponents. He doesn't really respect Esav. He says, Esav, what is he, a street thug? I am a great, reflective, intelligent Jewish guy, and what is he? He's a guy off the street. He's a strong thug. He's a gang leader. What do I have with him? When he has the dream about the angel, that's really the angel of Esav. right? That's teaching him. He also has God also has a plan for Esav. Don't think that it's only for you. So when he sees Esav in the morning, he says, "When I see your face, I see the face of God," because now he realizes that was the face that he saw in the dream. Meaning, God is telling you that if you want to make peace with somebody, you really have to see the face of God in them, like in the movie. I see God in you, right? In the movie that we saw. So when you see in the other person, you genuinely respect them. So automatically it changes the tone of the discourse. When he bows down to Esav, perhaps he ingratiated in himself a little bit too much, the rabbis say, but it doesn't matter. The point is, he respected him, and it was genuine, it was sincere, and because it was genuine and sincere, they could come up with some kind of a pshara, some kind of a compromise. In fact, to the point that you'll say, well, they never really got along. It's not true. If you look at the end of the parsha, they were living together for a while. It says that they were living together in the same land for a while until they became too wealthy that they couldn't live on the same land anymore. So Yaakov, yes, he delayed in getting back to Esav, but eventually they actually came and lived together. These two guys who you would think they couldn't stand each other. So it shows you the power of the ability to find some kind of synergy, even with somebody that you think it's intractably different. So if you open yourself up to it, if you really listen and you really give them the respect. Now, let's take the other side of the coin. We learned about not attacking and not putting the other person, not framing it as a winning-losing situation where you're trying to be the winner and you want to make the other person the loser. What happens when you get under attack? Okay, sometimes you're not in control of it. Sometimes your spouse is having a bad day and they come in and they start screaming at you, and it's going to happen. And sometimes you'll be the perpetrator. You try not to. You can only be responsible for your own behavior. Number one. So you shouldn't ever be the perpetrator, but you might sometimes be. And you might sometimes be the recipient, even though we are not exonerating the person who does it. Obviously it's not a good thing, but let's say it happens, okay? Like everything else. So it happens. So what's the best thing to do when you're under attack, so to speak? What's the best thing to do? Now, we all know that screaming back doesn't work. That should be obvious. Nobody here is going to say that it does, right? Good, okay. Screaming louder might silence the other person for a while. Hitting, shooting. All of these things are drastic measures that could be taken to silence another person, but will not contribute in any way to your harmony at home. Particularly the shooting. Definitely, or the hitting. Now what happens is, what most people do is either one of two things. Either they respond in kind, they get yelled at, so they say, well, you did this wrong. You're telling me I did this, well, let me tell you about you. And so they start giving it back. And what happens? Of course, the other person says, oh, you're right, I really am bad. I take back what I said before. And then everyone lives happily ever after, right? That's realistic, right? No, that never ever happened. It never even happened once. In the history of mankind, I guarantee you that never happened. I've never seen it happen, and I'm pretty confident it's never happened, ever. So, fighting fire with fire doesn't work. If your goal is harmony and your goal is getting along, then screaming back can only make it worse 100% of the time. There's no exception to the rule. Because the other person is already upset, they're screaming at you. They actually, you could think of it as, they just hit the tennis ball into your side of the court, or they just threw the basketball into your side of the court, or they just threw the football into your side of the field. And now you have an opportunity to run with it. Now, if you respond in kind, all you're going to do is throw gasoline on an already raging fire, and this person's obviously already upset, and it's just going to get worse. And now you're going to get angry, they're going to get angry, and we don't even know where that's going to end. So there's absolutely no benefit in the screaming back. That's for sure. It never works. Second possibility that people do is they start getting defensive. What do you mean I'm a lazy, good-for-nothing loser? That's not true. I took out the garbage once last year. Right? They start to give excuses. They get defensive. They try to explain themselves. They try to give all kinds of arguments for why it's not true. And they try to, defend their record, let's say. Now, what happens then? How is that perceived by the screaming person? Invariably.
You're not listening to me, and you're not validating my feelings.
Exactly. You're not listening to me. I'm saying you're bad. Own it. You're saying you're not bad and I'm wrong. That's not acceptable. Now, we don't know why this person is coming against us with anger. It may be that they have a legitimate reason or a not legitimate reason. It doesn't matter. There's only one way to diffuse a person who is angry and attacking you, and that's to let them get it off their chest and to listen to it. I know it's hard. It's very difficult to be under attack. I know because I've been in this position many times in many different settings. It's very difficult to be sitting under attack from someone, or more than one person, and to not either have, not respond by either defending yourself or by firing back at the other person who they think they are and they're also no good and all that. But you have to keep in mind that neither of those two responses are going to help, because in both cases, all you're going to do is make the other person even more upset. If you defend yourself, they're going to feel that they have to push even harder for you to submit to their arguments. And if you argue back, that's going to give them even more reason to think that you're terrible. So, what are your options in this case? I will give you a strategy that works many times. I can't say that it's foolproof because I don't think there's any perfect strategy, but here's a strategy. Number one, listen very calmly without any judgment. Don't get emotional. That's the hardest thing, but don't get emotional. Listen. Don't judge. Don't get emotional. Then, so how do you get back in control of the situation? Now, reflect back to the person what they said to you. So, you're saying that you really feel that I'm this, or I'm that, or I've done this wrong, or I've done that, and it's very upsetting to you. And and get to the point where the person says, yes, you are saying what I'm saying. In other words, don't try to not own it. Because if you try to shift it back onto them, or you try to deflect it, they're going to shoot harder. What happens in a war when people are firing away and there's good defense on the other side? They shoot more, not less. But if you say to them, if you surrender a little bit and you meet in the middle, so now you're able to have a dialogue. You're able to diffuse the bomb that was going off. Now once you do that, once you say to the person, oh, so this is what you're saying, you really feel you're upset about this and you're upset about that, so then they can start to engage and start to talk. Now, what should you do at this stage? My suggestion is, now we go into regular dialogue mode. In other words, now we're back to what you do in a regular disagreement. Because what happened was this started as a one-sided attack. You can't really stop a one-sided attack head on. There's no way to do it. There's no way to stop it, except by trying to transition it into a discussion. So you transitioned it into a discussion by really hearing the person out very calmly. Usually if you're super calm, a person who's flying off the handle chills out a little bit. But if you get really excited, and you're very excitable, it adds to the fireworks. So if you can be very calm and listen to what they have to say and just ignore the fact that they're basically saying that you're a terrible excuse for a human being, and you can absorb that for a short time, then when the fire ceases to be thrown at you, now you can have a real discussion. And the first step in any discussion, like we said before, is try to see what you can acknowledge that's true about what the person says. Now it may turn out to be that they're completely right. And you have to be able to deal with that eventuality or that possibility that they could be just right. You messed up. But usually there's some gray area. So the way to deal with the gray area is what I told you before. Acknowledge as much as you can about what they're saying that's right. Why will that help? Because if they stopped breathing fire at you, now they might even cool down because they hear you not only saying what they said, not only saying, oh, so you're telling me that I'm lazy and you really feel that I don't work hard enough and you really feel that I don't respect you enough and you really feel that I'm not responsive enough and you really feel that I'm this and you really feel that I'm that, and they're hearing that, and then you say, you know what, I think you're right, I really didn't go as far as I could have with this, and I really didn't go as far as I could have with that, and I didn't think about this. And in other words, if you acknowledge it, they're saying, wow, he's not just listening, or she's not just listening, but he or she is actually processing what I'm saying and actually has the humility and the greatness about them. It's really a greatness in the person that they can acknowledge that and own it and say, you know what, you're right. Okay, now the last and the hardest thing to do is if and when you did something actually wrong, to apologize with no excuses at all. With no excuses at all. Because as long as you hang on to the excuses, you're still saying you didn't really win. Why a person wants to give excuses because they want to say, you didn't really win because I really had a reason why I did this, but I'll give it to you. Whereas if you just say, I'm sorry, you're right, I really should have thought of that more, and I didn't, and I'm going to try to do better next time, that's like music to the other person's ears most of the time. Now, there's only one case where this doesn't apply, and that is where, and this happens from time to time, where a person explodes and flies off the handle because of completely misinformation. Okay? Candace found some other woman's number in your phone, all right, and she thinks something's going on, and she just goes crazy on you, and then she finds out that no, it was your mom's number.
Still another woman.
Okay. Right. So, in that case, it's just a misunderstanding, and you can't say, I'm sorry, I was, you can't take ownership for something that isn't true. Then you just say, oh, that was actually my mom's number. And in other words, you have to correct things. You still have to stay calm. Don't be like, why are you accusing me of this? What's wrong with you? Who do you think? Because that's not helpful. It once happened to me years ago that somebody brought me into a meeting and started going, I wouldn't say yelling and screaming, but definitely castigating me for something that it was completely misinformation. And I just let them go on and on and on and on and on. And at the end of the discussion, they said, now what do you have to say? I didn't try to interject or anything like that because I knew that would not be good. At the end of it, I said, oh, there's a misunderstanding. This is not happening. This is happening. And what do you think happened then?
You apologize.
I'm so sorry. It was a misunderstanding. I'm really embarrassed. It's like, I didn't have to do anything. Because most of the time, a person who goes into something like that, they think that they know their facts. So you just have to stay calm. If you start getting defensive and you start getting all riled up, that shows that you got something to hide. Right? If Uri did that, that might not be the number, but there's another number in there. And he's not so sure, right? So you got to be careful. But but otherwise, if there's really nothing to hide, the best thing is to stay calm, because real facts, when someone's just operating on a total misunderstanding, should correct the situation immediately, and you don't have to worry. There's no reason to get worked up. It's just a misunderstanding, a factual misunderstanding. They thought you did X and you did Y, and it's okay. Most rational people can deal with that. Now, what happens? Another case where you come to a situation where there's a disagreement about whether you did something wrong or not. In other words, the person comes at you that they're very upset because you bought something that they thought you shouldn't have bought, or because you went and did something that they thought you shouldn't have done, and you actually think that it wasn't such a bad thing, or that it was the right thing. So you have to really separate this into two issues. One issue is that the spouse is upset with you and has a different view. And the other issue is whether what you did was right or wrong. There are really two issues. One of them is more of a theoretical, intellectual issue, and one of them is a personal issue. And a person who is wise and discerning will be able to handle this very carefully without without it exploding. How do they do that? Well, first of all, you always have the option of apologizing even for something you don't think was wrong. You always have that option. And there's absolutely no shame in doing that. You're doing it for the sake of shalom bayit. What do you have to lose? So your wife didn't think that it was really a good investment to purchase the $5,000 large screen TV that you wanted to, HD TV that you wanted to put in to watch football. You can just be very apologetic. You still think it was the best investment you ever made. Right? So you may think that way, but you have to ask yourself, like we go back to principle number 1 in the previous, in the very beginning of the class, which is you always have the option of saying, of choosing your battles, of saying, you know what, I'm sorry, that was really a bad idea. You don't have to necessarily mean it, but you sincerely are sorry that the other person's upset, and you don't think it's worth it arguing that you were right. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can sometimes let things go. You don't always have to be right. There's a saying, I don't think it's such a true saying, You can either be, what is the story? What's the saying, Tom? You can either be right or you can be happy, right? I don't think that that's necessarily true. That's not necessarily true. You don't have to argue every point, though. Let's say you're right. Buying that TV was a terrific idea. You're a genius. But you're never going to convince the other person of that. So what's the point in arguing it? And what's the point in trying to make your case? And is it really important enough that that person think you were right about making that decision? Because that's really what you're arguing on. What you're really arguing on is to convince the other person that you were right to make that decision. And the question is, what value does accomplishing that really provide you with? So one possibility, one option that you always have is to let go of the issue and to say, you know what, I'm sorry, it was a mistake, I shouldn't have invested it, and to let it be. And even if in your mind you may think differently. You may think differently. But you realize that there's not much to be gained by making that point, and it's unlikely that you're going to persuade the other person of that point, and it's just going to be an agree to disagree. And so that's one possibility. The other possibility is to apologize sincerely for the hurt feelings and to explain why you did what you did without blaming the other person for feeling the way that they do. That is more nuanced. Okay? The easiest thing to do in all cases is just to apologize. If the other person's upset about a decision that you made, and you know that you're not going to convince, and it's a done thing, it's a done issue, and there's nothing that they're going to be able to do to convince the other person, the best thing to do is simply to apologize. And even if you still think that it might have been right, you don't really have much to gain from trying to get in and to convince them otherwise. It's more important right now that you reestablish harmony in your relationship. But if you feel that there's some benefit in stating your case, because this is going to come up again and you need to explain why you did what you did, so the best thing to do is to parse out the two components and to really sincerely be sorry to the other person and to listen to what they feel and what they think about what happened, and to hear them out and to do all the listening and all of the comprehending that you need to do, and maybe even learn from them. Like we said before, it's possible that you'll learn from them, that you'll get a different perspective from listening to them. It's quite possible. But at the end of the day, to explain what you did. Now, when you explain, there's two ways of explaining. The wrong way to explain is to explain condescendingly to the other person that they don't really know what they're talking about, and that obviously purchasing the $10,000 flat screen TV was a brilliant idea. The other way to do it is to explain why it was really important to you without putting them on the defensive. So you acknowledge why they feel the way that they feel, so they can at least be vindicated in that and feel better about that. And you can apologize for the upsetness that they experience. And then on the other side, you can explain your behavior, but not in a way that judges them. That's where you always get into. That's the problem of Yaakov and Lavan in this week's parasha. Because when Lavan chases after Yaakov and says, why did you run away, and so on and so forth, and Yaakov's answer is defending himself. First of all, remember what we said about defensive. Nobody likes defensive, but he defends himself, and his defense is implicitly a critique of Lavan. It's implicitly and explicitly a critique of Lavan. So he doesn't just say, oh, well, I did it because I thought maybe you would be very unhappy with me leaving, and I'm sorry that you were upset that I left in the way that I did, but I really didn't feel like I'd be able to get away otherwise. So I did what I felt was in the best interest of my family. Now that's a lot less confrontational of a way to explain it than you switched my thing 1,000 times and I thought you were going to steal my kids from me, and you've always cheated me and you've never been honest with me, because then you're saying I did this, not only was I right to do this, but you are no good. And that's why I had to do it. And that is the way to lose, any argument. Whereas you can acknowledge to the person and say, I'm so sorry that you were upset that I left quickly. Imagine that you're Yaakov and you say, I'm so sorry that you're upset that I left quickly. I really, I regret that you couldn't, kiss your grandchildren goodbye. And I really felt that this was what I needed to do for my family, that it would be difficult for us to leave, under any other circumstances. And it would be hard to argue with that. It would be hard for Lavan to respond to that with anything other than, okay. So that's your last option. And one last principle. So we've gone through disagreements, We've gone through where you feel that you're right, where you may actually be wrong. We've gone through where it doesn't matter if you're right or wrong. The last thing is, general principle, the less explanation, the better. Okay? The less explanation, the better. It's always true. When somebody has 17 reasons why they did something, do you know that probably none of them are true? Because 17 bad reasons doesn't equal one good one. But one good one doesn't require 16 other ones. So if and when you need to explain what you did, like I gave you the example with Lavan. Lavan says, why did you do this? I don't know if
Something a man would do.
Right. Why did you do this?
Or the man.
And say, why would you say to the person, well, Yaakov is an example, unfortunately, of somebody who does it wrong because he gives a million things, and they're all kinds of. They're also not only does he give many explanations, but he also gives a lot of critiques of Lavan in the middle of it. So he just
Yaakov and Abraham, when they're confronted about saying
from Avimelech, right? So yes, Abraham is okay because Abraham does two things when he's confronted by Avimelech. First, he says, "I had a reason; I didn't want to be killed," and then he says, "And also." It's true. Yeah. Right? So the Ramban explained, some of the Mefarshim, they come and they explain that. They say the reason why he added that reason was for a specific purpose, because he wanted him to know, I didn't actually fool you. So that it would mitigate his perception of, you didn't respect me. You lied to me because you didn't respect me. He said, actually, no, I had a reason for telling something that wasn't 100% of the truth, but it wasn't a lie, it was a half-truth. He was mitigating how much disrespect he actually showed. But the example that I like to use also is Yosef. Yosef with Potiphar's wife.
He did the same lie.
What? Which one? Right. Well, in Potiphar's, right, it's true. In Potiphar's wife. Potiphar's wife. Right, that's right. Potiphar's wife is an example that's a key example of this as well. Because when Potiphar's wife puts the moves on Yosef, he says, listen, how can I go with you, be involved with you? He says, I came here and I'm the greatest person in this house. And everything in this house is under my supervision. And your husband's given me all the power, and the only thing that he doesn't let me have is you. He's like, and how am I going to let all of this go? And also sin to God. So what ends up happening? Also sin to Hashem by doing it, right?
Yes.
So why does he need all the other answers? Well, there's nobody as great as me in this entire house, and everything is in my hands. So what ends up happening is he gives her a lot of reasons, a lot of talk, and what does all that talk end up doing? Making her feel horrible. I'm too great to waste it all on a woman like you. That's what he's saying. What, do you think I'm going to throw away everything that I have for you? Right, a woman is not worth it. That's what he says to her. So how is she feeling now? Even worse. What could he have said? Just the last part. It's against my religion. Or, even better, I'm not good enough for you.
Wow.
You are so great, I'm not good enough for you. I would feel inadequate. I couldn't do it.
Never mind.
Right? That's another way to spin it. But the point is, one simple reason is always better than more than one reason. Because as soon as you give more than one reason, people start looking for holes in it. Okay? So when you need to explain yourself, and we said there's only certain cases where you really need to explain, when you need to explain yourself, and there is a good reason, okay? Let's loop back for a second. If there isn't a good reason, we're not going into this part, because that means you're just apologizing. We're assuming there is a good reason. If there is a good reason, pick the clearest and best reason and present that. Because if you present more than one reason, you invite the other person to start scrutinizing the reasons and arguing on the reasons and developing a whole new debate and a whole side discussion about the reasons. You invite scrutiny when you give too many reasons, because it seems like you're trying to cover something up instead of really explain it. Because for a rational decision, there only needs to be one good reason. The one good reason could have two parts, but it should be one reason. So if you can give one simple reason for what you did, like, why did I buy this exorbitantly priced waste of a piece of technology because it was on sale for half of the even more exorbitant price, or whatever the reason was, or I needed it for whatever reason. You have an explanation that you're able to offer, a simple explanation, not 6 explanations. So then what ends up happening is you explain yourself succinctly without inviting scrutiny or seeming defensive, because the appearance of being defensive will generate additional tensions in the relationship. So, just to quickly summarize everything that we said tonight. All right? Now, we have our general principle: choose your battles wisely. You don't have to argue on every point. You don't always have to be right. Not every disagreement needs to be resolved. Not every difference of opinion is worth bringing into the open forum where it can cause more problems than it's worth. That's number 1. Number 2, keep your goal in mind. What's your goal? Is your goal just to express your feelings? Is your goal to change the behavior of your spouse? Is your goal because you have to take a common action together or have a common approach to something and therefore you need to have a resolution? It's important to keep that in mind. Because sometimes you can agree to disagree in the end. It doesn't have to be resolved. Sometimes it needs to be resolved. So you're going to have to find a way to resolve it. Number 3, develop genuine respect. The genuine respect that you have for another person will shine through in how you interact with them, and you might learn something from them. You might actually be wrong. Your perspective should be capable of change if you're an open-minded person. Number 4, we said, and this is my own personal contribution to the field, so I put special premium on it. Agree with the other person as much as possible, and that's true in all interactions, all debates, all discussions that you have in life. The more you can agree with the other person, the more likely you are to be able to make a good case for whatever you disagree about. The more you disagree about, the more fields of disagreement, the more distance is created between you and the other person, and the more potential landmines there are on the way to any kind of common understanding, and you don't want that. Now, when you're under attack, we learned the steps of dealing with it. Don't be defensive and don't fire back. Both of these things give the other person a message that they're not really being heard, that their message is not really being conveyed. Listen calmly. Respond with some kind of a summary to show that you've listened. Acknowledge everything that's true. If everything that they have to say is true, just apologize. If you still have a difference of opinion after you've heard everything that they have to say, you have 2 options. Option number 1 is simply let it go, simply apologize because the other person's upset and it's not worth it. It's not worth it. It's already a done deal. Option number 2 is to separate out the 2 components, to apologize for having caused them a lot of upsetness, to be genuine in that, but then to give a simple, elegant, and hopefully rational explanation for your behavior so that the person can understand where you're coming from without the explanation implying in any way that there's something wrong with them, which is the key thing. Don't say, I did it because it was on sale, but you waste all my money. That's not an effective explanation. Okay? An effective explanation is, I really felt that I had to do this because of such and such reason. Which is a non-confrontational way of presenting it, and they can respect your thoughts, hopefully, and you can respect theirs, and that keeps the door to future dialogue open. So I hope that everyone learned at least something from our discussion tonight. If you have any questions, I know it's getting late, we're supposed to do our Arvit now. If we have a minyan.